I don't know. I don't know, Deepak. I think maybe mine's boring and blurred. So,
well, I'm coming to you from Stockholm right now, so you hear some jazz in the background.
You're in Stockholm?
Is that? I'm in Stockholm, close to you. I'm flying through Amsterdam.
Yeah, well, you flew over my head.
I did.
Yeah. I'm not in San Francisco at the moment. I'm not in San Francisco. No, I'm not. I'm not. I'm just saying that's a nice looking background there.
It is a very nice looking background.
Yeah, I missed that spot on the other side of the bridge there.
You're all making me feel inadequate.
All right, so everybody should be able to share, by the way. Deepak and Raphael, you should be able to, and Michael, when you're ready, as usual, Zoom share slides. Jack, I'm counting on you to have some scintillating commentary as we go. We'll make you a lead discussant on the next jam. So the flow.
Pleasure to be irritating. I am happy to be so.
Yeah, so the flow will be when Stacy joins. We'll give it about a minute for people to join, which is about now. We'll see folks coming in, and yeah, folks are joining. Welcome everybody. Top of the bottom of the hour. We'll start in about 1 minute. I would ask that those are joining, you can edit your name just to say your association. If you're with Intel or you're with healthcare startup, just someone, so we know a bit about that, and to definitely use the chat function as you go to add commentary, questions, resources, ideas. Again, this is supposed to be super interactive, and we can't all talk at once. We're going to kind of lead the first 40 minutes with some pretty amazing content, and then we're going to jump into the kind of the jam component. So we'll give it 1 more minute, and again, rename yourself if you can, so we know who you're there, and use the chat aggressively. We're going to share out the video and the notes from this when it's done. So if anybody has any other follow-ups or ideas, this is sort of the beginning of a hopefully longer conversation. And so we'll go to 12:32 to start. And I'm here I'm on my first international trip in Stockholm. It's quite strange. No one's wearing masks. They don't have COVID here, apparently.
Right.
It's quite something. Maria, do we have Stacy here yet? Can't quite see. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for naming yourself. We've got folks from Siemens, Intel, Medtronic, all sorts of worlds who'll be jumping in. And Maria, why don't you give me the thumbs up when we're ready to start? In the meantime, I will share my opening slide. All right.
Hey, Daniel, why don't we go ahead and now that you changed the view, I'm trying to look at my screen and see who's here. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm happy to do a welcome from our side since we have everybody.
Okay, well, let's just kick us off formally. Welcome to the kind of a blended session on the future of surgery, imaging, medical education as it becomes more digitized, more enabled by augmented virtual and extended reality. And we're here as a bit of a listening / jam session hosted by Intel as we sort of look into this fast moving future. Again, please edit your name if you haven't to include your affiliation. Use the chat aggressively to share ideas, resources, links as we go. I'm going to give a brief preamble after a bit of a welcome. So maybe Maria, why don't you kick off with the Intel welcome, and we'll go from there.
Yes. So hello, Mario Zorovich with Intel, and on behalf of Stacy Schulman, who is our VP of and GM of Health and Life Sciences and Emerging Technology, I want to welcome you all. Thank you so much for joining us on a Friday and taking time out of your schedules. For those of you that joined us in the first jam last month, welcome back. We're so happy to have you in these discussions. And for those of you that are new and also our lead discussants, welcome. We really appreciate your time and sharing your thought leadership. Just a little bit of background. This is our second installment of our jam session with Daniel leading us off. And we started this out this year as a great way to listen understand what's happening out in the community. What are the obstacles standing in the way? How can Intel be a platform to help start to remove some of those obstacles and start coordinating in the background across the greater ecosystem? And so this is the second jam. We have 2 more for the rest of this year and look forward into 2022 and sharing more there. But welcome each and one of you every single time that we do these for the discussion that we can have as a community. So thank you for joining.
All right, great. Thanks so much. So I'm Daniel Kraft, the moderator. I've got a few hats from Sharing Medicine Singularity U, chairing the Enterprise Pandemic Alliance Task Force, and a few other elements. And we're really lucky to have 4 incredible physicians who are kind of, I think, at the cutting edge of the future of surgery, future of medical education, and the future of imaging and beyond. So I'll be introducing Dr. Catherine Moore, Dr. Raphael Grossman, Dr. Nadine Harakaram, and Dr. Deepak Kara as we go. This is a chance for us. I've got to visit Intel once, and not only we had Intel inside, I got to go inside Intel. So this is a bit of a chance for us to mix it up with Intel and hopefully help frame what they're going to help us build as we enable this sort of continued exponential age going forward. So we want to sort of stimulate new thoughts and ideas and really be reimagining the future of intervention, medical education, imaging, and beyond, not just for the next couple of years, but for the next decade ahead. And of course, Intel is intimately involved in enabling so many elements of our core healthcare system. And but even though we are in 2021, we're still not quite reached the 4th industrial age with health and medicine. Sputnik certainly has been a catalyst for the space age, and COVID similarly has sparked the health age. And many of us on this call have been deep on the COVID side and have seen some of the progress as a silver lining. And a lot of that progress has been catalyzed by exponentials. And of course, Intel is the home of Moore's Law, the power of computing getting ever faster and ever cheaper. And that's enabled a lot of our new digital age, mobile, connected, digitized, and is starting to certainly impact how we do every element of healthcare, all the way to surgical interventions and certainly medical education and imaging. And as we live in this age, we're all sort of trying to think about the future, right? As we're moving from the 4 walls of the hospital to the hospital, more virtualized care, including virtualized interventions, giving us now an age that's much more continuous with data. They can be more personalized, proactive, and become anytime and anywhere, and really move the needle not just to preventative and personalized and more effective for treating disease, but even thinking about preventing it going forward. So of course, a bit of the theme will be technology. Some of it is going to touch upon, especially for our friend Raphael, on augmented virtual extended reality. Those technologies start a bit kludgy, but get ever smaller and are really starting to enable the surgeon and clinician in general to be guided through procedures. It's enabling kids to be educated about their bodies using augmented reality t-shirts. Just my son Leo learning his anatomy when he was 3 or 4. We're in the age of course, VR, which is now getting exponentially cheaper. Many of you have played with Oculus and other type headsets, which is shifting, how we do everything, including many elements of medical education, from learning anatomy to going from sort of old school simulation. And again, you can simulate anything today and add this sort of digital layer to that, which can make it more compelling. And I think it's going to sort of synthesize with some of the things we talked about in our first meeting, sort of the Internet of medical things, data, to build a bit of a ways for clinicians and start to guide us through, just like you have driver assist to end up with surgical or clinical assist. And of course, that those technologies are getting more automated. We'll hear more from Catherine Moore and others about where that's going to take us. I just found this fun video that you might remember from Prometheus. I don't know if this is going to be a good thing or how far away we're going to have the fully automated surgical robot, but certainly elements of that are coming to play today. So if you haven't caught that scene, it's quite dramatic. And then Deepak's going to lead us in a kickoff of what's happening in imaging. Certainly, it's getting quite powerful. I had my full body MRI done about a year ago in Vancouver with a startup called Pernuvo, which will screen your whole body in about an hour for about $2,500. Came with an entire report. Imaging is getting cheaper, more mobile. This is the Hyperfine device. It's about 20 times less expensive than a normal MRI. It's mobile, plugs into a wall socket. And just like last week, I was in New York City and on the boat of Jonathan Rothberg and Ford Catalyzer, and they had on the deck one of the Hyperfine devices with a robotic arm for doing remote biopsies. We're literally on the Hudson, and I in 5 minutes had a full I don't know, I had my brain MRI'd and had some results. Here's my colleague Ricky Marrow had his done as well, so he proves he has a brain. But that was pretty amazing. 5 minutes while floating on a boat. So those things are possible, and I imagine in a few years you go to your corner Walgreens or Walmart and have a full body MRI done, and that might be analyzed, as we'll hear later, I think, and talk about AI and imaging that blends with all of this, and sort of brings us to this age where we're collaborating with technology. It's not human versus machine, but a synthesis going forward. So we're going to hear from our lead presenters. This is a JAM, which kind of stands for Joint Action Meeting. So after the key elements, take notes, but the second part will be much more participatory, share ideas, feedback, no long soliloquies, but chip in and out, hopefully form some new ideas, collaborations, and sparks that can go beyond this actual jam session. So that's the quick rules. So we're going to start off our jam with the amazing Dr. Raphael Grossman, who I've been lucky to know since I think he came to exponential medicine several years ago, and met the guys from Google Glass. I think, as you'll hear, was the first to use a lot of these technologies that have been a real catalyst in augmenting surgery and medical education going forward. So Raphael is a surgeon in Maine and an amazing digital health innovator and leader. And over to you, Raphael, for about 10 minutes on what you're seeing next.
Thank you, Dan. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me share my screen and tell me that you're seeing it okay.
Yep, great.
Perfect. So in any case, it's an honor to be here. I'm an acute care surgeon, trauma surgeon. That's my full-time job, clinician. But also I'm passionate about the use of technology to improve what we do, because I'm also very deeply frustrated on the state of medicine, healthcare, and healthcare education today. In the 21st century, we should be doing much better than what we are doing, because we have all the tools. It's just a matter of reimagining how we do things. As Dan said, I started early on, connected with Dan at Future Med, which is the earlier version of exponential medicine. And then I had the pleasure to meet the inventor of Google Glass. And I thought that immediately that was going to be a tool that could revolutionize how we did medicine, how we taught medicine, how we did and taught surgery. So very soon after that, I went on to do the first operation with Google Glass. And all I did was to stream what I was seeing live to a group of students nearby. And that caught a lot of attention and sort of brought me to have the opportunity to be an influencer, to be a sort of a pusher, a preacher, an evangelist of healthcare innovation in regards to using the technology in a smart way. So like you all imagine, surgery is just a theater, right? You go and you watch from the distance. That's how we still today do surgery. It's not very different to what we did years ago. It's a surgical theater, but now we have the opportunity to really do things a little different. With Google Glass having a perspective of the surgeon in this mock-up, you can see how basically I can bring the student virtually to inside my brain, inside my eyes, and have a direct view of what I'm seeing. So the immersive representation, it gives them a much better outlook of what's going on, and hopefully they can learn better that way. And not only that, these smart glasses have the ability to be a digital smart assistant for us, right? Telling us things that we should not forget about, guiding us through the actual process of healthcare, the actual process of surgery in this particular case, alerting us of things that should not be forgotten, hopefully improving outcomes, decreasing medical errors, increasing survival. It's all about using those technologies to make things a little bit easier, more efficient, and better. This is not one for some reason. So basically, what I see it is that the evolution, right? The natural evolution of how healthcare happens, right? We have seen a slow progression of the integration of the technology in healthcare, in medicine. And that has been really pretty obvious in some cases, and you see how devices have gone from very small devices to devices now that we wear in our, in our hands, in our wrists, even inside our eyes, possibly, with smart glasses now, and which are becoming soon glasses embedded or contact lenses embedded with circuitry. That is actually a reality today that in the next 3 to 5 years we're going to start seeing in a much more standard way. So
Camera.
It's a little stuff. So we're all familiar with the telemedicine, right? Remote connection. The pandemic has shown us that this is actually possible, and not only possible, but that remote connectivity is necessary in many endeavors of human activity, right? And if we can imagine that now it's easier to connect from the Earth to in this case, the International Space Station. It's a brief video to just show that. I want to show it to you.
This is Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences. How do you hear me?
Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences, I have you loud and clear. Welcome aboard the International Space Station.
So if we are able, right, to, oh, sorry, this is not progressing.
It's my privilege to make the first public call on stage to one of my best
So this is in
friends.
2011 with the iPhone 4, right? Something that was a dream before we could actually do it. We could instantaneously connect with someone live by video. And that opened up a lot of opportunities. Because we started being able to, instead of using very expensive machines, use machines that were very, very inexpensive in order to connect to anyone anywhere. In this case,
Thank you very much.
doing telehealth, right, telemedicine in remote areas. So in surgery, we have adopted some of those technologies. Okay? Those tools that were before standard now have been replaced by tools that include VR, AR, MR, equipment that makes our jobs a little bit better. Starting with the Google Cardboard that you all know, and if you have used the Google Cardboard, you have been immersed in these experiences that somewhat are life-changing and can really improve how we look at reality. You've probably seen this before, that so the brain gets completely full and transported to a different reality. If we can bring that to the education of surgery, we have made a lot of progress. This is my good friend Shafi Ahmed did the first VR live streaming of an operation in 2016. He had 55,000 students brought to his OR by the way of using either computers, tablets, smart glasses, and whatnot, live in the OR in 360 immersion. Technology has all come from science fiction, right? If we can manipulate the digital data, if we can manipulate the data in ways that a few years ago was not even imaginable. This is a HoloLens. This is an old video of HoloLens, but you know, this is all
it is so thrilling.
A reality now. This is a reality that we have integrated in healthcare. This is Dr. Atul Gupta from Philips using the HoloLens device in the interventional cardiology lab. So instead of having multiple screens, you can have that augmented imagery around you, the spatial computing imaging basically help you do a better and more efficient, more ergonomic healthcare. If we look at what Brain Lab is doing in association with Magic Leap, creating their digital viewer, the mixed reality viewer, where you can bring all those images to the OR and you can lively see images in many dimensions, not just the axial, the coronal or the sagittal computerized tomography dimension, but in any dimension that you can think of, improving that way how you manipulate those images in order to do a better surgical care. If we think in the past how we learned in cadaver labs, right? If you have this picture that impressed me because of this model here, mortuary vivus docens, which today should be technology vivus docens, technology teaching the human. That's the way we should do it today. The old adage of see one, do one, and teach one in surgery has become a thing of the past in a way, because now we can do it much easier, much more intelligently by the use of technology. Simulation in the past it was very limited. Now we have opened up the opportunities to look at reality in a different way. The way we looked at images in the past has been replaced by things like fantastic voyages. This is surgical theater, an immersion into the real anatomy of the patient that has been digitized and transported to an XR sort of a universe. So this is what we are living today. And this is Animaris. This is an app that you can get in your AR Core or AR Kit enabled smartphone and bring those AR images to the operating room to show the students real anatomy, real physiology in ways that are almost for free. So the potential is really real. The potential has been now become
standing around a model,
a
almost
thing
like a
of
tour group in a
today,
museum,
not a thing of
where they're
the
all in.
future. With tools like the HoloLens, for example, and Medivis, which is an application that brings all that digitized radiologic images to the OR, not just to diagnose, but in some cases to treat patients, where now we can mix the real and the digital in a way that allows us to guide our surgeries in a much precise way. Now we have the technology to make that a reality. This Apoplar also uses HoloLens in the same fashion. So these are things that were filmed about 2 or 3 years ago. So the progression that we have done has been truly, truly exponential. And if we think of at a learning surgery, for example, procedural steps with virtual reality and what fundamental surgery, for example, is doing, where you can 3D print drills, and you can use these drills or these other tools in order to feel the different densities of the tissue, and not just immerse yourself, but also have the potential to adapt haptic systems that allow you to feel the virtual world. This is really revolutionary. This is a glove called the Sense glove from the Netherlands that using mechanics allows you to touch, to feel, to have the haptic feeling of the virtual world. In a way, it is phenomenal that you can not only be immersed in the digital reality without geographical barriers. Wherever you are, you can practice the procedure until you become an expert before you actually touch the human. But now you have the ability to feel that digital reality, to feel those actual images in the virtual reality. So it's really amazing that even in procedures, in this case, fundamental surgery, ophthalmology,
the conjunctiva and tenons capsule are dissected from the superior limbus.
Imagine how difficult it is to create the haptics on these very millimetric and microscopic tissues. It is possible with the technology now that allows you to feel you cutting the tissue, pulling this very delicate tissue, and master the skill before you go to the operating room. Imagine the potential with something like the Tesla suit and the Tesla gloves to bring that to the operating room and be able to ergonomically train you to be a better surgeon, and also be able to monitor your physiologic variables, all your data, in order to give you a performance review. If you think about AI and what AI is bringing to us, and what platforms like digital surgery, for example, are doing, integrating image recognition and AI algorithms to, as the surgeon trains, it can be measured as well. And then when you go to operate and you recognize different procedures step by step, this system eventually can alarm you if you are deviating from a normal, if you're deviating, if you are going to create an error, if you're going to have a surgical error or a surgical mistake. So integrating all the potential of image recognition, artificial intelligence algorithms, and surgical training. This is what we are what we're seeing today. So it's using the imagination, like in Star Trek, right? Years ago. This is becoming a reality. The Beamy platform allows you to do teleconferencing, doing basically VR, avatar, teleconferencing like we are doing right now, but in a more lively way, in a more immersive way. So this is actually real, and you see platforms like Portal that are being not yet applied to healthcare. But if you think that something like this could break barriers of communication and collaboration, so the future is really, really exciting. And the Ventana has done this a few years ago. And when you have a real hologram in real life talking, to a real person. So imagine breaking those barriers of a geography of time and of access of global health. So it's about the technology being used in an intelligent way, in a smart way, to make us better humans, to, in a way, improve, enhance, augment healthcare, and create a more humane healthcare that, after all, will benefit all of us. So this is all I have, and open to having a nice conversation. Thank you very much.
Wow, thanks, Rafael, for a true tour de force. And it's been, I think you're a perfect example of someone who's technology friendly and taking it from the early Google Glass to HoloLens and bringing that forward. If you were going to jump forward 5 or 10 years and say, what would you wish, let's say, the Intels of the world would need to create that is still a barrier on the technology side? Any sort of sticking points that aren't enabling this sort of convergent, synthesized world?
I think that the most important thing right now is to make sure that the potential of communication and the connectivity and collaboration is realized by increasing obviously the speed of the connection, right? The bandwidth of the connection. If we think about 5G and think about how fast we can have a signal with no delay, I think that is very critical. But at the same time, if we think about developing AI algorithms that allow us to have what we call the clinical ambient intelligence that Microsoft, in a way, has talked about, but that is going to be something that will be critical, where you have multi-systems watching you, listening to you, reading every move, so that every move can be in a way synthesized to make every move perfect, so that we have a better way, a more safer way to do, in this case, surgery. I think that's very critical. And at the same time, think that the systems have to be available not only to places where countries that have high income. We have to find a way to bring all this advanced exponential technologies to everyone in the world. If we think about 5 billion people don't have access, right, to surgical care that is safe and accessible, and that is a statistic from 6 years ago, right, from the Lancet report. I think that we need to make that a reality by creating technologies that allow us to really make this more equitable and more better spread all over the world.
100%. And certainly, as you say, to democratize healthcare and up-level even the average surgeon to be the top surgeon. And we have a lot of surgeons on this call. Remember, 50% of doctors are below average. None of them on this Zoom are below average, but we can take a 20th percentile and make them a 95th percentile. And on that theme, our next lead discussant is Dr. Nadine Haracharam, who's a plastic surgeon in the United Kingdom, who I met, I think, 5 years ago when I was speaking at Wired Health, and through Tony Young, the head of NHS Innovation, and smartly identified her as a young entrepreneur, really taking some of these technologies and applying it to the today and the future of surgery and medical education and upskilling. So over to Nadine in London to share a bit of her perspective and what she's doing with Proxima and beyond. Nadine?
Thank you so much, Daniel. It's great to be here, and it's great to see so many fond friends on the call as well. I can see Shauna, Catherine, Jack, Raphael, and I'm sure there's more, but I'm not seeing them on my screen. But it's lovely to see you all, and thank you for the opportunity. It's always hard to follow Raphael because he shows you all the potential in the future. But what I'm going to do today is really kind of walk you through my version of that and what we did. And obviously, it's always probably worth starting by sharing my personal story and kind of what got me on this path. I actually grew up in San Diego and I've been in London for over 15 years. I'm a surgeon. I'm a plastic surgeon. I carry out reconstructive breast and pelvic cancer surgery here in one of the biggest hospitals here called Guy's and St. Thomas's. But as a surgeon, I was incredibly frustrated with the status quo. It was clear to me at the time, back in 2014, 2015, that the 5 billion people lacking access to safe surgery wasn't acceptable. The fact that 18.6 million people were dying from that lack of access was not right. But even more than that, even within my own backyard, within my own health system, and a lot of my peers and my family who were doctors in the US, we had a real fundamental challenge around variation, access, variation in knowledge, and an increasing skills deficit and resource deficit that wasn't going away. Now, undoubtedly, that has all been just absolutely, catalyzed and made worse by COVID in a sense. But nonetheless, that was a clear challenge that we had. There was this misconception that variation in care was just a problem of kind of that part of the world. But as a practicing surgeon, I can tell you we were seeing it day in, day out within our own health systems as well. And so what we're trying to find out is how do we make sure that we actually look at this problem holistically? It's a problem everywhere, not just somewhere. And what are going to be the solutions that try and solve for this? And having spent, over 10,000 hours in an OR myself, I would sit in my OR and I would look around at the operating room, and it was incredibly analog, undigitized, non-data driven. We're still writing things on pieces of paper, whiteboards. Different systems were recording things on, DVD-ROMs and CD-ROMs at the time. Different systems don't talk to each other, all of it disconnected and siloed. And all that rich and exciting collaboration and great surgery that would happen, but then it would just happen there and that's it. There was no way to capture it and to leverage that knowledge and that great information that was happening and share it everywhere around the world. And of course, if we look back in history, this is very familiar, I'm sure, to many clinicians or those who worked in the clinical space. This idea that, and it's why we probably still call an OR an operating theater here in the UK. It's very much around that kind of, we're all going to sit around and watch and engage in an operation. Now, there's a lot of pluses that come from this co-presence, collaboration, and communication. We're driving us to innovate. We're pushing each other to push the boundaries and see what we can deliver from a surgical capability and capacity. But of course, we took that model, which worked back then. Of course, not the fact that it's all white males and one woman, but the fact that it was many people working around a table, and really didn't kind of adapt it or evolve it. Now, this picture is a bit facetious, but it's a true picture from DeBakey's theater. And for those in clinical care know how famous DeBakey is in the cardio space. And I'm not as popular as DeBakey, but I can definitely attest to the fact, at least pre-COVID, of having at any point between 5 to 10 people in my operating room. Now, it's one thing about learning and watching, but more than that, imagine all the variation that's going to stem from that. Everyone's just capturing what they think they figured or understood, or what they're seeing from the angle of a shoulder or an armpit in this picture. And then they're going to go away, assimilate it in the way that they think, and go away and do it with no record, no data footprint, no digital footprint, and no way to actually see if quality is being maintained across that continuum, across that sharing. And it was back in 2014, I started to think about how could I solve this? And I imagined a world where every operating room around the world was connected, digitized, data-driven, collaborative. I imagined a single source, a single OS, an operating system software that could connect with any device, whether you're working on a robot, a video stack, a laparoscopic machine, an open case, the same platform, the same language would be used across all of them. And we could crowdsource knowledge, share best practices, drive standardization and codification in surgery. And back then it was an idea and it was more of a personal passion project back in 2014. But 2 years later, as I was testing this out in many different countries and starting to build literature around this, CNN caught wind of what we were doing and published this editorial that says, could this technology be the future of surgery? Now, this is many years ago now, 2016, but at the time it was a kind of penny drop moment for me where this was no longer my personal passion project. Now this was like, oh my God, this is now something that, really the world is crying out for. I should do something with it. So, we raised some money, built a company, and we're now kind of 120 strong, delivering this across 90 countries in the world. But it's amazing how this problem that I faced firsthand and how you can sort of really try to deliver solutions towards it. And so what is Proxima? Proxima is a software. It's browser-based, iOS and Android-based, that allows you to virtually reach in. You can sit at your laptop and you can dial into a case anywhere in the world where they have access, and you can collaborate, you can share best practices. You can, overlay augmented reality tools, your own hand, imaging systems, and others to really bring that whole holistic experience in the OR to a much more immersive layer, but not requiring limited hardware. You can have any hardware you have, use any hardware you have and kind of interact. Every case is recorded into a library and leveraged for future best practice, future knowledge. And I'm sure there are many people on this call that can speak to the potential value of that, given all the evidence around video performance metrics and video aggregation. And it's been used across health systems from large to small, IDNs to ISCs and others. And it's very much about the in the moment. Can I virtually reach in? Literally 45 minutes ago, we just finished a big live kind of collaborative case for mitral valve clip replace kind of surgery. There's people all around the world interacting and talking about this difficult case. So you can go big, or it can be just two people, a proctor and a preceptor, trying to work together through a case. Or I might be doing a really interesting case and have many people dialing in to learn. And it's how we move surgery from a see one, do one, teach one to a prepare, perform, and perfect. Every case is recorded. You go back and review, you get feedback, you get performance metrics. We start to digitize the continuum. And the recording is key because you're starting to move from rather these point solutions that exist across the healthcare continuum. There's a lot of digital apps that exist to actually a single point of value, knowledge, collaboration, and access. And imagine every recording, the insights you would get from it. So similar to sports, you have your game tape, and whether you're an American football fan, one might be looking at it because of the quarterback. Others may be looking at defense or offense. You can gain so many insights from a single recording of that operation. Imagine the knowledge and the impact that that could have on surgery around the world. So I'll show a really quick video. I love sports, so obviously I'm looking for any analogies around sports, but I hope this resonates with a lot of you.
Technology is changing our pursuit. Just look at the world of sport, the pre-game plan, the post-game review. Every angle, every possibility, watched, reviewed, applied. What about the clinical world? At Proxima, we enable clinicians to virtually scrub in and collaborate with each other from anywhere in the world, allowing any clinician to prepare, perform, and perfect their craft. Pre, during, after. Think of us as your game tape. Start your pursuit today. Plug in Proxima. Connect clinicians. Save lives.
And so as I talked about that data, imagine that richness of that recording. You know, whilst you're providing value today, you're enabling doctors to work together and collaborate. You're providing value for training and upskilling workforce. You know, we have examples where Proxima is being used in peripheral parts of England to actually upskill nurse practitioners, clinical consultant nurses, physicians assistants. How do we increase the workforce? So it's providing value today at the same time for the potential value of the future. With every recording, you can start to look at things like accreditation, access, scheduling, efficiency, all these incredibly important parts of the surgical chain. And I use surgery to encompass all things procedural, so endoscopy, colonoscopy, and interventional. And this is a project, as I just described, where we're even collaborating and bringing in 5G to improve connectivity and starting to actually identify through AI and object recognition the learnings from all those collaborations that have been happening, all those annotations, all those discussions on what polyps look normal, abnormal. And this is, of course, one example. You could extrapolate this to really any specialty, but this is a core example that we've used with a key need here in the UK. And what we've demonstrated, and everything I've tried to do, is anchoring it in evidence. We've published over 25 peer-reviewed journal articles. We're training twice as many surgeons in half the time and maintaining quality, which is really critical. It's access, it's quality, it's efficiency, and it's accreditation as well. Now, personally, and many of those who know me know I'm very, very passionate about global health. For 10 years, I was traveling at least 10 to 12 weeks every year to different parts of the world to look at capacity building and sustainability in surgical care. Until I recognized that, you know, these trips in and of themselves weren't going to shift the paradigm with what the Lancet Commission had published. So we've partnered with the United Nations Health Innovation Exchange, Ariande Labs, Japaigo, and all these huge organizations to try and remind all kind of supporters of Proxima, the whole world, is that, you know, from day one, impact and sustainability has been built into our DNA. It's not an afterthought. It's not something we do after we become a very successful company, something we're doing from now. And we're emerging as a real leading partner in the global health space. You know, just yesterday, we were supporting the delivery of beautiful young babies out in Kenya, where maternal health is a real challenge, and supporting some of those charities on the ground to do that, and trying to address some of the key SDGs and, you know, that are essential, you know, to the future and the better world for our children. And just some quick metrics: we're in 500 hospitals so far. We've got over 120 people. We work with over 40 medical device companies and in over 50 countries so far, and we're fully HIPAA and GDPR compliant. I know we're running out of time, so maybe I'll just show one more video and I'll stop. Otherwise, I'll feel bad for the other participants.
We're in Australia, Melbourne, Australia, and we have 69 different countries. So it's such an honor, and thank you, Proxima.
So Marcelo drew out the bubble. You can see the discoloration all along there.
That's really neat. That's cool, isn't it? Claudia, are you happy with that, or?
Yes, I'm really happy because you see it's not too much anti-erosion, and that is probably one of the main problems.
We can hear you. Everything looks very beautiful. Sounds beautiful as well.
Very, very nicely done. Very smooth.
Thank you, Mark, and enjoy your theater day today.
Thank you so much. I have to run off to the OR myself, and I'm going to go try this.
Here's the pancreas.
Ah, yeah, just a little wink of it.
It's our friend.
Yeah.
I always say the pancreas is our friend because it always gets such bad press in the colorectal world.
So you can see that kind of collaboration and bringing it all together. And it's really about unlocking value for all the providers. Healthcare is complex. We know surgery is very complicated, but if you can find a way to bring a solution that solves value and solves problems for many people, you have a much higher chance of success. And one that can integrate into anything that exists, whether it's a fully integrated OR, a wearable, a console, a compact. And that's what we do today. And we're working with many hospitals expanding this use case across their needs and driving it even forward to provide more value for them, helping them with supply chain, helping them with OR efficiency and so many other needs that they have. And really building a path towards a really truly digital surgery environment and ecosystem for the future, where we can kind of connect operating rooms, bring all that data together in a cohesive way, and help drive a connected surgical care continuum that benefits all healthcare workers and the patients within that environment as well. I'll probably stop in the interest of time, but happy to answer any questions. And thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thanks, Nadine.
That deserves applause.
Progress.
Thank you, Shauna.
You incredible progress, and you started with like iPads, and someone can sort of do a basic coaching. But just to jump forward, now that you're recording thousands of surgeries, and you have a human coach often coming in, a master surgeon helping someone who's less maybe experienced, is this going to eventually blend in where you have an AI coach not just pointing out the polyp, but saying step by step what needs to happen?
I think that's, that when you look at sort of the data and the analytics, that has to play a part. We need to think about how do we address the gap in workforce. So there's an element of coaching and mentoring, which as a more senior surgeon now, I think is really, really important. And of course, I'm not the only one who's talked about it. Caprice Greenberg has done phenomenal work on it. Atul Gawande also published on it in the New Yorker many years ago. But we need to also think about other ways to make information more accessible, data and information more attainable. So if we can start to aggregate all these diverse data sets, and they really need to be diverse to reduce bias from many different parts of the world, many different use cases, then you can truly start to bring and deliver very curated information and data and AI, elements to that environment, which I think will help us really shift that gap in surgery.
Awesome. All right, stick around for more discussion. Put questions in the chat, and I'm going to pitch it over to Dr. Catherine Moore, fellow Stanford med grad who has been for many years leading a lot of the innovation at Intuitive Surgical, one of the leading robotic surgery company that has really led the charge and is now evolving all sorts of other advanced approaches. So Catherine's been a real leader in that space. Now leads the Intuitive Foundation and is helping really create this fusion of digital surgery, robotics, and beyond. Over to you, Catherine.
Thank you, Daniel. And thank you both, Raphael and Nadine. I will grab and expand on some of the themes that you guys have been talking about as well. But with robots, big pieces of capital equipment. Robotics is a deep theoretical study of sensors and connectors. If we can get all of those in one particular place, we can be able to give clinicians the ability to work at scales that are smaller than their hands, see at scales that are smaller than what their eyes can see. And we also turn a lot of the things that have been largely unobservable in the past. Nadine talked about see one, do one, teach one. This process of training, we make it observable because we pass it through a digital step. And as soon as we think about passing it through a digital step, we start to be able, and are turning surgery into data, we start to be able to apply the kinds of analytic tools to that data that we apply to data all over the place. And so when we think about the role of robotics, it has a strong role in the performance of surgery, but it also has a very big role in the way we think about collecting data around surgery and training in surgery. So this is the Da Vinci Xi, which is our most recent abdominal thoracic soft tissue robot. And just for those of you who aren't that familiar with the Da Vinci, this is really the business end of the Da Vinci. And it is an exact replica of the movements of the surgeon's hands, but across a small incision and inside the body. And so that means that you can do things like do a repair on the inside of the heart without really ever having to crack open the chest. And so, but when I called robotics a deep study of sensors and connectors, we're only capable of doing this because of the limitations on our computation in terms of how fast we can close these loops. And then also we have a lot of materials limits. We don't actually stress our central processing chips anywhere near as much as a lot of other applications. And because we're making big pieces of capital equipment, this is our single port robot where it brings several instruments in all in one cluster, and then they kind of come out and work in that space. And so you'd think, looking at our chips, that they are laughably primitive for the kind of stuff that we're doing. We routinely, our design cycles are so long that the chips are usually obsolete by the time our robot is out in terms of thinking about cutting edge of the way these things are moving forward. And we often have to buy many years of chips into the future because the way these pieces of equipment get used, there's a used product market in these big robots that will go on for probably 30 years, which means that we need to be able to support these things for a very long time. And we don't use that many of them. And so most of the time, it's not worth it to build or design a new chip for us outside of anything, except for some of the specialized ones that we make in terms of vision. And then we're the only ones that care about them. And so we end up having to make those chips ourselves. And so we're sort of a strange area where you think of us as being very computationally intensive, and yet we're a bit primitive when it comes to some of the things associated with it. However, we are really starting to push some of the envelope on what we're doing in terms of peripheral sensors and being able to start thinking more like distributed computing. This is our ION product, which is a lung cancer detection and ablation robot. And really one of the most amazingly enabling technologies for this was a shape sensor. So it's a fiber Bragg grating long glass sensor that allows us to close a tight control loop around the tip of that sensor in terms of its pose. And so this allows us to control a flexible robot through the tortuosity of the lungs. At the same time, we're using a lot of these same things that you saw Raphael talking about in terms of taking preoperative images, doing segmentation of those images, and building 3D roadmaps so that we can navigate through this. And it's this combination of all of these technologies coming together that in and of themselves were not enormously technically demanding, but they come together in a way that has a real clinical benefit. And so the ION has been out for the past year, and there is a study that was done called the PRECISE study, the results of which have just come out, which show that you can get 83% diagnostic yield all the way out to the pleura of the lungs. And so for the clinicians on the call, everyone's going, oh, wow, because in the past you couldn't get out there for, you couldn't get 50%, and you couldn't get 50% if the nodules were smaller than like 2 centimeters. And we're getting 83% when the nodules are about 1 centimeter and are all the way out in these little tiny branches all the way out. And these were incremental improvements in several of the aspects of our sensors and our ability to do this kind of control, and our ability to do the image processing that allowed us to create roadmaps that would let us get out there. But you bring all of these things together in combination, and you now get a big step forward in terms of clinical utility. And so Intuitive Surgical has been making robots for quite a while. It's funny, we were just put in the Edinburgh Museum of Surgery. And when you've been working on cutting edge stuff and the robots have been out there for more than 25 years, it now becomes something that you put in a museum. But we've had steady growth. Pandemic was kind of an interesting time for everybody for lots of different reasons. We sort of eked out 1% growth and are doing more than 1.2 million procedures per year worldwide with these robots. And that's only increasing as we start to bring out the things like Ion, which is still fairly new. But when we really think about some of the bigger problems that Nadine and Raphael have also been talking about, robots are only going to be a very small part of that answer. And that's because a lot of the problems that we're trying to solve, the 5 billion people who don't have access to basic surgical care, which results in 7 to 17 million people dying every year because of lack of access to that care. And when you start comparing that to 10 million people a year dying worldwide from cancer, 4 million people a year dying from HIV, TB, and malaria combined, and in the first year of the pandemic, we saw 2 million people die. You start saying the sorts of deaths that are in association with not having access to surgery, it is a major global public health crisis. And when we think about the infrastructure, 88% of the next billion entrants into the middle class are going to be in Asia, essentially in a circle that you can draw around India, Indonesia, and China that represents half of the world's population. But you start thinking about educational infrastructure in these places, and India can graduate from its formal fellowship programs 400 oncologic surgeons per year in a population of 1.25 billion people. And when you think about this crisis of we simply don't have enough Indian surgeons, and you multiply that around all of the different areas in which we're seeing this kind of growth, this is where we really start thinking about what are the roles of technology, what are the roles of the educational things that you've seen Nadine talking about, some of these VR technologies. Because when we think about building infrastructure for surgery, the hospital takes about a year to build. And that's what people typically think about as the infrastructure that we want to build. The people standing in front of it are actually harder to build. It takes 1 year to build a hospital and 10 years to train all of the clinicians that are going to be able to run that hospital. And so when we're talking about these big demographic changes that are happening globally, that are happening on the space, a full population of the United States coming online in India as middle-class consumers in the span of 10 years, we have got to be able to think about how are we using the different kinds of technologies we've got to address this fundamental human capacity problem. And so surgery needs surgeons and hospitals and nurses, but fundamentally it needs new ways in which we're thinking about education. So it's quite a common theme that you're seeing in here. So I alluded to us being able to turn the unobservable learning process into something that's observable and data full and subject to data analytics. And so what we have been doing using the robot as an intermediary is deconstructing these tasks that we see, being able to use machine learning, observation, and additional sorts of sensors to be able to determine what's going on in that task, to look at the way a novice becomes an expert, and then to look at the way 1,000 different experts do exactly the same step. And you start to be able to draw generalizations associated with this. You start to be able to make observations about not just what is the difference between a novice and an expert, because it doesn't take machine learning and AI to be able to detect the difference between these two data sets here, but to figure out how do you coach someone from that novice state to that expert state? What is it that you can observe about the procedures that they're doing? If you break these tasks down into their component parts, what are the things that expert surgeons do best that novices really struggle with, and how do you tailor education for this? And so you start to be able to build both simulation and based coaching, where you've got AI coaches that deal with the lack of a large number of master surgeons who can educate. And so we talk about Proxima doing a one-to-many, and an AI-based being able to do that personalized coaching that allows people to do specialized. And so when I think specialized targeted practice while they're working on it. And so when I think about the opportunities of the way in which we are building these tools, in the way we think about integrating robotics in, we're really looking at a future of distributed sensors and distributed computing, being able to aggregate what's going on in a particular environment from lots of different measurements, being able to pull those together and then be able to give very targeted feedback to these clinicians as they're learning. So we can use robotics along the way to enhance their physical skills, but we can also start to use these platforms to enhance their learning and be able to move things forward in that way. So I am happy to take questions from there. I have more slides at the end, but I shifted them in the interests of time.
Thanks, Catherine. I love that last piece, watching thousands of surgeries, and the need you mentioned about, not enough surgeons and other clinicians. Can we go from the 10,000 hours to the 500 hours? Have you been able to start to measure the improvements in outcome from that sort of approach?
I believe you actually can. And a lot of the rules of thumb on how many cases, or as a musician, what sort of practicing you need to do, or as an athlete, what kind of practicing you need to do, or as a surgeon, how many cases you need to do in order to become an expert at something, is based on observation of people that were doing essentially all comers. All of the cases or experiences that they had were treated equally, and then they were able to extract pearls from those things as they were going along. If we can pre-extract a lot of those pearls and give you very targeted training, this is something the airline industry does extremely well, in that in airplane simulations, you don't do the same landings over and over and over again. They throw black swan events at you and make you deal with the things that you would never encounter in a normal environment, and let you hone your skills in that way. And so I think as we get better at observing what the transition from novice to expert looks like and how to target the training, we will get much, much more efficient at doing that training. I see a hand.
I was say I have a quick question too.
Okay, but I think Ricky Mara, yeah.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Intel and Daniel, for running this jam session, by the way, and Catherine, great presentation, and everyone before you as well. Just three really quick questions. Number one, when you think about remote medicine and you think about the idea of latency, we saw a video earlier where someone was talking to someone on a space station. We can deal with a couple millisecond lag, in conversation. Will we get to a stage where a master surgeon in the United States could treat a rural patient in India that has one of these devices? And are we going to get to that with 5G, or are we going to need something more advanced? And then I'll just tee up all the questions because they're all kind of connected.
Sure.
Number two, as we move away, as we saw the advent of minimally invasive and robotic surgery, we saw that the surgeon kind of got farther and farther away, from the point of surgery. And so, are we seeing some level of medical error because that haptic feedback isn't quite there and that sense of touch isn't there? And what does Intuitive think about that, and how are we going to get that back? And I think one of the questions in the chat that was echoing my third question was, ultimately there's a big data stream here right now. And at some point, do you imagine that the machine itself will just displace the human hands because it has enough training data? Maybe that's 10 years from today. Is that a vision for Intuitive or future of robotic surgery?
All right, so you've asked three very big questions. So the first question you're asking about is remote surgery. The second is haptics, and the third is really autonomy. When's the robot going to do it on its own is kind of my interpretation of your question. So the remote surgery issue, it's fairly well established that a 200 millisecond delay is almost insupportable in terms of fine motor tasks without a serious amount of feed forward control. We could debate sort of when we're going to be able to deal with that latency, but you start talking about the moon and we have speed of light issues. We don't get to break the laws of physics. I'm going to step back and say, what's the fundamental problem that we are trying to solve in that situation? And that fundamental problem is we have need here and we have expertise here, and we want to be able to combine that expertise with that need. But in surgery, it's not an isolated incident. There's a preoperative workup, a recognition of what that patient is going to need. There's post-operative care, and there's intraoperative emergency care if something goes really bad. You can't have a bunch of lay people around that patient where you have the expert surgeon swoop in, do surgery, but there wasn't any competence around that patient to begin with. And if you have competence around that patient to begin with, and somebody swoops in and does that surgery and then swoops back out again, you haven't addressed the fundamental problem, which is there wasn't expertise at that site in order to give that patient that surgery. And so the model that I believe in much more strongly than telesurgery is telementoring. And so if you have a group around that patient that's capable of supporting that patient, your master surgeon can swoop in and teach the person who is there physically how to do that procedure and coach them through that procedure. And at that point, you've increased the local knowledge. You are not worried about the latency and anything like the same thing. You have started to increase the scalability of what these networks can do. And you're addressing that kind of fundamental problem. So I don't believe in remote surgery. I believe in remote telementoring. And I will hop on my soapbox about that all day. I believe robotics is a great intermediary for that, so your second question was about haptics. And I'm going to also step back and say, why do we believe that haptics are necessary? And we believe that haptics are necessary because surgeons have always used a haptic device in order to be able to manipulate patients' tissue. And we've felt hard nodules and all of that sort of thing. But if I can use fluorescence imaging or the kind of imaging that Dr. Grossman was talking about to positively identify where that tumor is, and I'm not relying on my gross motor skills to be able to definitively identify where something is, I think I'm in much better position clinically to be possible that I can get all of that tumor. And so we haven't actually been seeing any increase in mistakes or surgical errors because of the lack of haptics. We have haptic instruments. People will occasionally use them during their training, and then they often just abandon them at that point because the visual response is enough of what they're seeing. And then the final question, just because in the interest of time, autonomy. We have an existence proof that a natural intelligence surgeon sitting at the console of the robot can do every single motion that's necessary to do a surgery. The surgery gets done through a robotic intermediary. So now all we need to do is create a natural or an artificial intelligence that's capable of learning the way our natural intelligences do. And we know that they can drive the robots in order to be able to do all of the procedures. Are we doing that research. We are not natural intelligence or AI general intelligence researchers. That's an incredibly specialized area. We're watching it very closely, but when that emerges, we will have the robots that those new AI general intelligences can drive.
Great.
So, Shauna, were any of those your question, or?
You kind of touched on it, and I'll try to ask it in just a yes or no, but we're focusing on the skills of the surgeon and the one person who's driving the robot. And increasingly, we talk about how it's a team. Mm-hmm. So how are these things actually making teams better? Because we know that every surgery is not the same group of folks coming in. So right. Getting us better as team performance, how is it doing that in addition to the individual performance?
And so in all of these situations, and this is one of the things that I was talking about with having lots of sensors around, what we really want to be able to do is not think about it as like a single processor in the middle that's controlling everything, but that we are building situational awareness of what's going on in the operating room, and that there are tools that are saying, oh, we can see you're at this particular point in the surgery. The next thing that's likely to happen is this, and can alert other people on the team that the next thing, or even one of the things that we've been thinking about is when things start to go wrong is when there's huge delays. But if you know what a particular clinician uses when they suddenly start to get major bleeding, you can alert central processing, you can alert the nursing staff, you can alert the circulator that it's very likely that this thing is going to be asked for next. And so there's a lot of things associated with smooth functioning of the team and learning how that team operates that can be supported by this kind of distributed observance. And then I'm seeing in the notes, yes, not the future state, human-assisted robotic surgery. I absolutely agree that AI augmentation of the surgeon and ability to see and navigate is the direction that we want to go rather than autonomy.
Speaking of seeing and navigating, that is in the realm often of the radiologist, which is, and the interventional radiologist. And we're lucky to have Deepak Kora, a very esteemed interventional radiologist. I met him initially in Qatar, where he was helping building the future hospital state there. Is now CMO of One Qubit, building the next generation of quantum computing, which I don't know if it'll supplant Moore's law. You can touch on that to share a bit about what's happening on the imaging side, which certainly fuses with the robotics and medical education. Over to you, Deepak.
Awesome. Thanks for the intro. I really appreciate it. And look, it's such a pleasure to be here. And I'm hoping that you guys will find this a little thought-provoking, to say the least, and maybe a bit controversial, but it's okay. I'm used to being mired in controversy. So look, welcome everyone. I wanted to spend a bit of time walking you through. Daniel had asked me to say, hey Dee, can you talk about the future of imaging, right? Are you able to kind of give us some insights into where things are going? And specifically, you know, if you have any feedback for the likes of Intel, can you please sort of just ask for them and you know, maybe allude to them in the conversation. So what you're seeing in the background here is just a machine learning algorithm that we've built around chest radiography, one of many machine learning algorithms that our team builds. It's the first AI algorithm cleared for use in health by Health Canada, and is currently deployed across a number of health systems in Canada for detection of abnormalities. But let's come back to where imaging is, right? The way I think about imaging now and the future of it is there's sort of 5 major buckets where the change is going to happen. And because I work in the world of computation and advanced computation, by the way, I also continue to practice radiology, which I do about once or twice a week. But realistically, most of my time is spent thinking about these sorts of things. Is we can talk about, I'm going to try to unpack each one of these things, something about one slide about computational paradigms, another slide around where the future and evolution of software is going in the world of diagnostic imaging, and actually what I think will be the future of software as we move into the world of expanded health information systems. And then something around the way in which radiologists and the health system is operating and working. Just a quick piece on policy, and then the last piece, which is sort of the big, huge elephant in the room, and that's data. So let's just march through here and give you a quick understanding of where the current state of computation is. We've been spending a lot of time in the world of compute on the classical side of compute, which is where most of our algorithms and most of our software currently operates. There has been some pretty significant work done by a bunch of manufacturers, and actually with foundries and chip design becoming less and less expensive, and the capability to produce bespoke chips becomes high. I think that there's sort of this move towards the application-specific integrated circuit, because the general all-purpose classical computer couldn't really solve the problem that we needed in an efficient way. So a really, really great example is really the Face ID chip on your iPhone, and that is a bespoke chip that was built just for machine learning and looking at your face. And there are so many examples of this. You look at ultrasound machines now developing ASICs for a variety of different specific applications. And that has sort of bridged into what we call quantum inspired computing. And I just want to pause for a second and say, the real promise of quantum computing is the massive parallelization and actually a whole new way of being able to process data. And I could spend a lot of time talking about that, but I don't want to, we only have 10 minutes or so to talk. So I want to just quickly march through this. But anybody who wants a little bit more detail on where we're going with quantum and what the future of quantum is, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. But as we look at quantum inspired, these are classical computing algorithms and ways in which we can do classical computing that take away some of the physics inspiration that comes from quantum computing. And you can see this, being used right now in a variety of different applications. Microsoft has this thing called Brainwave, which is a FPGA or field programmable gated array of technologies that really does some beautiful work around massive parallelization of processing. Then we get to where we are right now in the world of quantum, with these, which is these sort of noisy intermediate stage quantum computers, and those are really, we're starting to see very, very early utilization of those. And there's still a huge leap before we can take those and make them sort of your general all-purpose computer, like the laptop you and I are presenting off today. But obviously it will not be something that you can carry around with you. It'll be something sitting in a massive data center somewhere. And there are, massive efforts being made now globally around moving from these noisy intermediate stage quantum computers, which are computers that have really significant error, to the world of quantum. So what does the world of quantum promise us? It in many ways could be completely transformational, but probably the most important thing for us in healthcare is an understanding of things as they happen at the submolecular and subatomic level within the molecules and structures that we know form the fundamental parts of biological life. And so we right now have to make assumptions around how the quantum world works, and we won't be able to do that and we won't be able to actually have a much more detailed understanding of that until we have quantum. And there's a whole work that's sort of being done in that space around design of molecules and things like that, which we already do today. So I'm going to move on from that to talk about software. So, I often use this analogy, and I'm so happy to see, hi Nadine, it's nice to see you again. I'm so happy to see Nadine sort of talk about some of these things, and we've talked about this many times before, and that is sort of, if you imagine walking on a commercial airliner today, and the captain pops her head out from behind the cockpit and says, "Oh, by the way, guys, it's just me flying today. We don't have a co-pilot." I think most of us would turn around and walk off that plane, right? And yet, in healthcare, we do this stuff all day long, right? Every day. And it's just like somehow it has become an acceptable way of being for us to not operate without these co-pilots. So what the promise, I think, of machine learning is it does allow you to do some very, very interesting things in terms of what I call scaling intelligence and providing a co-pilot, particularly relevant in the world of imaging, because the technologies for machine learning that exist today are very good for machine learning. And I drew this thing. I'm sorry about the crazy quality of this. I tried to draw it really well. And I just said, forget it. I'm just going to draw it on my iPad and put it up here. But these sort of a distillation, a little bit of my thoughts here. And it is definitely controversial, guys. So please don't take this as like the gospel truth. There's so much in here that's worth unpacking. But if you look at the world of imaging right now, we have a pretty significant and almost linear increase in demand. And that linear increase in demand results in an almost linear increase in cost that parallels that demand. And as a result, the number of radiologists also increases. And so, and Daniel has said this really well many times before, and I've used this quote, and I'm not sure if it was Daniel's quote or not, but it was that, you know, doctors who use machine learning or AI will replace doctors who don't. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. I think that what we're going to see, though, is as we look at building these technologies, and as we look at some of the work that Facebook and Google and Amazon and Microsoft are doing, which is very, very transformational, and OpenAI, you know, we talked about artificial general intelligence and things like that, we are going to see a pretty significant uptake in the capability of machines. And that uptake in capability of machines will result in a decrease in costs that sort of parallels the decrease in cost that talks about as radiologists retire. We will just not be replacing them because we will actually do a much better job of making more efficient radiologists. I'm not saying that we'll replace the job of the radiologist, we'll just make them more efficient because we'll be able to scale the intelligence of multiple radiologists into a piece of software that then accompanies the radiologist and improves their workflows. So as we look at this thing, and you know, I've got these sort of linear stepwise increases here, and some of these stepwise increases, for those of you who are familiar with the world of machine learning, will understand that we are going to see very transformational shifts in how machine learning works. And that will then increase the capabilities of the machines to the point where we will, at some point, this is out in the future, you know, maybe it's 10, maybe it's 15 years from now, maybe it's 5 years from now, I don't know, but we're going to see a capacity of these machines to far exceed radiology demand, right? And so we'll see a leveling off of the cost line, or the cost of diagnostic imaging services, that will come down and sort of level off, and will increase at a much lower rate as the capability of machines increases. So this is just a very interesting way of sort of looking at where software is going to go, and particularly where machine learning is going to go. So people like those of you who are here from Intel, first of all, thank you so much for hosting us. And second of all, you know, if you look at this sort of thing, I think most people who are in the know, who build these technologies like me for a living, I think will be able to tell you that there's some variant of this graph that someone will be familiar with. And I don't purport to be the economics guy that's actually studied all of this. I'd love to do that at one point, but I think there is some truth to much of what you're seeing here. So then we move on to ways of working, and I'm going to take just 3 minutes, Daniel, and we'll be done. But just to talk about things, capabilities for radiologists and the actual profession itself. So we are now moving towards outcomes-based quality assessment. And so how do we do that? Where do we get there? And the whole value-based care revolution that's happening in the US is something that is going to find its way across the world. And as we look at these machines and everything is digital and everything is data-driven, we now have the opportunity to actually truly analyze and understand the mistakes that people make, and it's become much more transparent. And so that move is going to necessitate a fundamental change in the way that we work. There is a capability and expectation from RADs to read anywhere and anytime, and there's certainly an expectation from health providers for radiologists to do that. And so you know, there's a company, we talked about AR, VR, and mixed reality. There's a company out of Canada actually that's building a virtual reality reading room, so that radiologists can literally report with the VR goggles on anywhere they are, on a subway train, or you know, in the parking lot of Walmart. And then obviously the whole tie-in on how is genomics and metabolomics and all of these factors going to tie into the actual way in which we diagnose disease, because we see it's this sort of molecular imaging and a bunch of other components coming in, and Daniel had alluded to this, there's also new ways of imaging. And of course, the evolution of software. And the way I think about software, I think is pretty important to understand, is that if you look at the value chain of radiology, it's like a bicycle chain, right? We've got all of these steps in terms of how we produce an eventual result on a patient. Each one of those steps is like a link in a bicycle chain. In most conventional electronic medical record systems, those steps are like one follows the next, and they're held together by a pin that's like a rusted old pin that doesn't let the chain move and do all sorts of really creative things. The next generation of software will actually replace those pins with actionable data. And that data will then allow the next workflow step to actually be moving in the right direction or the wrong direction or a different direction or staying the same. And whether that data that's liberated is actionable by a machine or actionable by a person, that's the future of software and the evolution. Of course, there's a whole slew of work done on policy and remuneration, which I'm not going to go on in great details of, but you know, the key probably message here is that we spend $100 billion a year in the US on imaging. And the fact that we're looking for efficiencies is really important because margins continually shrink. As the cost of the equipment goes up, as the cost of manpower goes up, margins in that business continue to shrink. Last, I want to talk quickly one slide about the data deluge. You know, the fact that when I finished med school in 2002, there were 400,000 English peer-reviewed publications in PubMed in that year. And sorry, not 2002, 1997. And now there are 1.6 million. Just last year alone, we had 15,000 machine learning papers. In 2016, we had 200. And if you think about the number of, and this goes really nicely along the whole Intel thing, you know, 1,436 digital device interactions occur with every single patient every single day right now. So it results in an absolutely massive, massive amount of data that we're generating. How on earth does one person, as a practitioner of medicine, deal with all of this? And the answer is it's just impossible, right? Absolutely impossible. So we definitely need machines in some way, shape, or form to help us sort this all out. Just to give you a quick recap on what we think of as medical imaging, I don't want to talk about just it being radiology. We saw some beautiful stuff from Nadine around, you know, GI and how we're doing colorectal surgery and how the scopes take a lot of images. Derm, obviously, cardiology, ophthalmology, and a bunch of other really significant diagnostic things. So last slide was basically for all of you to understand that, you know, as we look at the evolution of machine learning, and there's a reason why I put sort of stepwise increases, there has been some absolutely unbelievable work done by Facebook AI over the last year, literally 6 months around machine learning and three-dimensional analysis of machine learning. If you think about the human body is really a three-dimensional structure. We sort of break it apart when we do imaging into 2 dimensions and try to look at it that way, but it's really a 3-dimensional structure. So this whole concept of video transformers and 3-dimensional 3D transformers in machine learning and actually video machine learning is a huge area of massive interest for all of us who are working in the world of imaging. So I'll leave you with this slide, and that slide is that, you know, I often say this, that when medicine, when practiced well, is sort of this elegant blend of art, science, and spirit. And I'd sort of add to that and say that, you know, if practitioners are informed by intelligent, organized data. Back over to you. Thanks. Happy to chat and answer questions.
Thanks, Deepak. Thank you. That was awesome. I'm going to hold questions for a second. Maybe actually give the first question and maybe a quick share to Dr. Michael Woods, the CMO of Care Syntax, who can take us into the jam code. Michael?
Sure. Yeah, let me share my screen here and we'll get going. I appreciate the opportunity and the invitation to be here and share with you all today. Talk a little bit about improving global health, which has been a common theme of the speakers. I don't need to tell anybody on the call how important the operating room and the surgical care continuum is. It's expensive. It generates the vast majority of revenue in hospitals. And I think since COVID, this number of 50% is probably going to be higher. And then it really generates about 75% of cause-specific deaths is related to a surgical procedure in some way. And there's been a ton of focus on analytics, as you all know. There's been a lot of analogies. You know, Nadine likes sports. We like the sports analogy as well. And yet the operating room continues to kind of be that area where there's not a lot of data coming out. even though there's a lot of data generated there. And our mission is really to take multiple data streams, not just the operating room, but pre and post-operative as well, and generate safer, smarter surgery. We've got a glitch here with the computer. The environment in which care is being delivered, and with COVID certainly has generated a new normal that's evolved. Again, nothing on this slide is going to be new or unusual to the audience, but COVID recovery has continues to have a profound impact on operational performance of organizations, which has put pressure on clinicians to get back into the operating room. 4.7 million cases backlog in the UK alone. And they have to focus on quality because payers are shifting to more of the value-based arrangements, as everybody knows. So whether it's the clinical problems, challenges that you have, operational transformation, or financial, and of course they're all linked, it becomes really important. And as some of the other presenters have talked about, part of what we really need to focus on is competency-based training. And so Proxima really has talked about that. CareSyntax has CX Connect looking at the same thing, but much like Toyota and the feedback that they can give you continuously enables improvement, we know that you can do the same thing in the operating room. And then I believe Raphael alluded to the fact that just because this technology exists, it doesn't mean it's going to absolutely just be adopted. There's these long tails from discovery historically, and hopefully we can accelerate that through the technology itself. And so, I kind of want to leave the audience with, CareSyntax really does understand the value and the importance of surgical video in the operating room. But it is important to understand that determines really only about 27% of the outcomes variability in surgical patients. So we're very interested as well in that preoperative area and how we can detect modifiable risk factors that enable that procedure to go more safely, not just from a technical standpoint, but also in helping the outcome in the postoperative period be safer as well. And so we're really focused on that actionable data, not just in the operating room, but pre and postoperatively as well, whether it's operational, clinical, financial, or training. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Michael. Yeah, it's definitely that continuum. It's not just the steel on the skin. We've got about 10 minutes, or we can stay a little longer for those who can, just to jam. Who wants to jump in with a question, comment, or idea? Jump on in. Don't be shy. Well, I'll ask a leading question then, maybe to Raphael and to Nadine. What challenges have you seen in resistance of clinicians to use these new tools? We're in this digital age, but many train pre-digitally. And what are the barriers to adoption, not just regulatory reimbursement, but mindset?
Raphael, do you want to go first?
You're on mute.
I think that those barriers are becoming less and less of an issue, and that acceptance barrier. And I definitely think that if you go to places where there's a lot of excess of everything, in regards to how you practice medicine, how you practice surgery, then people tend to be, I don't want to do it in a different way. This works for me. But when you go to the rest of the world where, there is a lack of almost everything in regards to practice medicine in a minimal viable way, then all those providers gladly accept almost anything. The pandemic, I always been talking about how we usually say the necessity is the mother of invention, but the pandemic is different. It's desperation is the mother of invention. And desperation has forced people to sort of accept all sorts of new tricks. And sometimes they find that those tricks are really revolutionary and game-changing. So I think that that's what's happening more and more frequently.
I'd probably add 2 or 3 more things. I mean, one, I think the evidence continues to become, overwhelmingly clear around some of the challenges we have and where these solutions can play a big role. But it does fundamentally stem from, building trust building the right relationships, and ultimately providing value for the end user. You know, a lot of what we're hearing, especially on today's call, is, you know, that clinically led or scientifically led innovation, seeing the problem, having that intimate knowledge of those challenges, and then trying to address those through solution finding that ultimately is providing value to many people. I would also echo what Shauna was saying, and Catherine, around ensuring that it's providing value to many of the stakeholders or the key players within that environment, not just the surgeon, but the multidisciplinary team. And in our experience at Proxima, we knew very early on that we needed to make sure that we built evidence, trust, the right mission and ethos around what we were doing, so we could take people on the journey with us and be really clinically led and patient driven in what we do, user driven. And that has held us in good stead. It is also important, I think, to recognize it's, you know, elements of the evidence, elements of trust, the right solutions, but at the same time, I think it's timing. And we're seeing this real transformation, particularly catalyzed by COVID, around the recognition that we need to think about providing and force multiplying expertise in a very different way. And that intersection of healthcare and innovation and technology can play a role if done correctly and done with the right approach.
You know, adding to that, everybody has been talking, well, economists, about the Great Resignation, and particularly in the US, how many healthcare folks are leaving, and the folks who are leaving are most experienced. And so this ability to scale the intelligence of the radiologist could not be more critical. And I'm wondering how we're going to be, not wondering, I'm excited about the ability to extend career longevity. And while somebody may have the intellectual capability, how do we make sure we continue to capture that and build on that and use that in training and preparing and advancing everybody along the way in their career? And I'm wondering also if it might help stem the tide of people leaving.
I'd love to add one example to that, Shauna. I don't know, Danny, if you'll give me just a minute or two. You know, I have a very specific example that actually just arose a couple of weeks ago. It's a very good friend of mine, you know, really, really well-known urologist, one of the top within his field, but unfortunately developed, you know, because of all the surgeries and everything, you know, some C-spine issues over time that have meant that he will not be able to operate at the same pace and volume and you know, at capacity as he used to be. But he has so many years and so much knowledge to share and give. And he reached out saying, look, it looks like I'm going to have to sort of renegotiate how I'm going to work with my hospital. I just can't be in the OR the way I used to be. I have to have surgery now, but there's so much I want to give and so much I want to offer. You know, if Proxima is already available in a hospital, I'd love to find a way to continue to mentor and train and support and upskill up and coming doctors. You know, imagine that multiplied over, you know, tens of thousands of doctors that are coming towards the latter part of their clinical careers or have had other injuries. And this could be a real way to kind of bridge that gap and scale expertise.
Yeah, thanks, Nadine. I have a very similar story. You know, there's so many radiologists that are retiring now and have amassed, you know, 30, 40 years of experience. And this is the same right across the medical spectrum. I love the whole thing that I've been thinking about for a long period of time is how do you scale intelligence? But before you scale it, you have to distill it, right? And that means that you sort of take the knowledge that's collected from all of these people by virtue of their output, which is in our world, the world of diagnostic imaging, it's the images and their reports. But realistically, in every single branch of medicine, there's some form of output. I love the fact that you guys are recording stuff. You know, Intuitive is doing recordings. Nadine, your team is doing the same thing. I love that, right? Because that's like a massive knowledge that we will be able to learn from and distill, and then find those edge cases and make sure that we can then distribute that in an intelligent way. So I think the future, in many ways, is sort of largely tied into that concept of wanting to make knowledge available.
Over to Ken Crowner as an orthopedic surgeon. And
so I'm actually one of those people too. I'm an orthopedic surgeon that's going to be retiring soon with cervical issues. I wanted to point out a couple things too, which is I didn't hear. I wanted to reiterate what you just said, which is the having the closed feedback loop of what actually is done in surgery with outcomes is an enormous problem in the musculoskeletal space. We do close to 1.7 million total joints a year in the United States, and we don't really know 15% of total knees do poorly. and are unsatisfied with the results, and there's no real knowledge of what was actually done in surgery. Clinical operative notes contain no information, almost
so true.
And having that feedback loop, robotics, the most exciting part of robotics, I think, in orthopedics, is we may actually see a correlation between what's done and the outcome of the patients, not to mention the increased accuracy and navigation related issues. But one thing also to point out is, I do agree also with what Michael was talking about, a systems issue. I have two companies that we're involved with. It all has to do with care coordination around the OR and the need to address efficiencies in general. One is we're working on full automation of SPD and sterile processing, recognizing the amount of delays related to an inspection of the tools, so you actually get what you need. We send 10 times as many tools to the OR of what you're actually using. And knowing what actually goes on and providing the surgeon with exactly what they need in a reliable way is so important. And then another company of ours is Duck Sparrow, where we're coordinating all the perioperative care of the patient. And in question to Intel, a couple different places. One is better access to be in direct contact with our patient throughout the full episode of care, so we can actually start to leverage all the various tools is an enormous need. And I know everyone and so many people are working on that, but it's an enormous problem. And the other point I was going to bring up was that just workflow in general of teams in the OR and the coordination that goes on is a tremendous source of opportunity to increase the flow, the throughput in the OR, and perhaps Nadine is capturing that information also. I'd love to know how you're getting cameras in the OR, because I think in the United States there is a real reticence on the part of many of the components of the team, union labor, nurses, et cetera, to be observed, to get adoption. And I'm sure it's very much a top-down driven initiative. I'd love to hear how you're actually getting penetration. Just some thoughts.
Yeah.
Thanks again. Maybe before Need response, I'm just going to call on our meta host, Stacy Schulman, to maybe any synthesis or closing comments, but we can keep jamming for those who can stay here. I know we've gone a bit past the top of the hour. So Stacy, thanks for hosting us, and any observations from the Intel side.
Yeah, this is a great conversation. Appreciate all of you coming in and, talking with us and to each other and letting us listen to the conversation. Some of there was a question asked on, essentially continuity of care. How do we think about that continuity of care for the patient? And it is a big focus area for us. When we look at, somebody all the way from getting care at home, into the ambulance, out of the ambulance, if they have to go into the surgery center, out of that, that's a topic that we're looking at. And, even in those areas where a patient goes from, a specialized hospital setting into, more rural hospital setting, and the decline in care that they tend to get. And we're looking at those topics as well. So, we're tracking through that whole thing. As we look at this space, of course, to us, it's not about, robotic domination. That's not our goal here. It is more about this conversation, which is what I love, which is how do we make sure that technology is a great assistant to the work that people do. And that's our area of focus. So really appreciate that conversation today and giving us some ways to think through it. Now kind of, I would say, is the offer, our group, we're an R&D group, we have nothing to sell you. So, we never worry about us coming and pushing chips on you. The offer though, is that, as we're on this journey to understand our industries better and to understand the problem statement in the industry is, the way we understand is by doing and by helping and by talking to people. So, where we can partner with any of you, please reach out and let us know how we can help. And we are, deeply ingrained in areas around policy, and helping shape policy, in different parts of the world where we talk to every medical manufacturing company out there. We try to partner with the great research hospitals. And we're, trying to, make sure that as we look at the industry, we're looking at it holistically. So the offer is, where we can help, we're happy to. And if it's, something in our wheelhouse, like, you want to talk to an assortment of nerds, we're happy to bring that to the table too, and talk about neuromorphic computing or quantum computing, you name it. We'd love to, go into those areas as well. So that's the offer is, feel free to reach out. You definitely have a resource here that you can tap into.
Awesome. Thanks, Stacy and the Intel team. Maybe we'll go for another 5-10 minutes with some jamming on any of folks who want to stay. And again, Stacy, you want to share your email or best ways to reach the team that you're leading up? Maybe put it in the chat. Tim has a question, but Nadine, do you want to reply to the prior question before we shift it over to Stacy?
I just want to double check. Was this about penetration and how we're penetrating the healthcare systems? Was that right?
Yeah, and also, can you get cameras in the operating room? You can do it easier maybe in the UK than in the US.
Yeah, I mean, we're in over 150 hospitals in the US already, and 500 globally. So it's a combination of leveraging the hardware that exists in hospitals and also adding and bundling extra solutions and hardware options that are off the shelf where needed. So we're not manufacturing any hardware. We're just leveraging what's there or bringing to the table the tools that will be needed. And that's kind of, you end up seeing a lot of integrated rooms and other rooms that already exist. You can use those, but ultimately there's a lot of off-the-shelf equipment that you can use that really kind of enables those ORs to turn into sort of smart ORs or smart cath labs, and you can connect people all together with that. So we go through a really rigorous process with the hospitals, but our process is pretty robust. It only takes a matter of weeks, and it's been really great to see the reception. I think because people are seeing the value at the end of it, they're willing to kind of go through that process. If I just turned up and said, hey, I'd like to put some cameras in your OR and I might do some recording and I'll kind of let you know what I come up with afterwards, highly unlikely, or a lot of kind of skepticism. But if you walk in with a very clear problem you're solving for them, it's a very different kind of discussion. So, a lot more to do. I don't want to kind of give away the impression that it's all a bed of roses, but we're definitely kind of working through that and learning a lot along the way.
Great, thanks, Nadine. Over to Timothy Lambs with a question or comment.
Yeah, I'm Mike Woods had to hop, so I'm going to kind of sub in for Mike a little bit. So I'm actually the president of Care Syntax. I wanted to echo one thing that that a few folks had talked about earlier, just kind of the topic on the Great Resignation. And one of the things that we're seeing is that it's not just hitting us on the surgeon front, right? It's hitting healthcare on the nursing front. It's hitting them on the administrative front. So when we think about the end-to-end improvement, it's really across all fronts that this concept of training and mentoring and having data available to be able to help with all of the decision-making processes. It's what we're seeing trend-wise is it's pretty universal across the board, not simply with or not just with physicians. And so I think that is an important part. And again, you hit on it, it's care coordination. It's all these different aspects from pre-op to post-operative that are being impacted, and it's kind of creating that new normal. And I thought, just because as an aside, I would agree with what Nadine said on getting cameras in the OR. I mean, we have several different parts of our platform that rely on video evidence, and kind of the bigger room cams are definitely, there's a little bit more questioning, I think, especially in the US on how to do that. And we've been successful in, I think, a similar vein to Nadine, that there has to be a purpose, and it has to be, sort of communicated and set up in a way that's not intended to be punitive. And I think that's where a lot of the pushback comes from, is people are worried that if they see something on camera that it's going to be viewed punitively. And so, we're working with one of the big academic medical centers here in the US, and they actually came to us to put cameras in, but the genesis of it was to be able to look at teamwork dynamics and how the clinical teams collaborate with each other to deliver better outcomes from the patient. And so when you sort of start to put it in that context and you say, there's nothing punitive, what we want to do is essentially take game film, right? Just like you would take in a football game or anything else, and see how are the interplay and the inter collaborations of the team members impacting the ultimate clinical outcome for the patient, or potentially the financial outcome. And so that we've had really good success in framing it that way and tying it back to, a specific use case that has specific improvements to patient care. And then the other thing I think is, just recognizing that there are different potential hurdles to that in different environments. Unions is one thing. Different legal teams have different opinions on level of consents. And so we've kind of looked holistically and said, what's the overall organizational impact? Who are the key stakeholders in this? And how do you kind of bring those stakeholders together around a common goal of making surgery safer for the patient? So that's sort of been our strategy on it. And I think it echoes really well the points that Nadine made. And then also working within the existing infrastructure as much as possible. Most of the rooms are equipped with it. They're either not getting used or the data is siloed. So, they may be taking video already, but they don't know where it is and they don't know what to do with it afterwards. So bringing some organization and structure to that is also a key element.
Thanks, Tim. Do you think, we talked about the big unmet needs, especially in many without access to surgery. Some surgeries are more limited in scope and may not require a fully trained surgeon to do a cleft palate. Are there some ways we can start? Maybe Nadine, you have some examples of where you've seen in very resources limited areas, your platforms or others sort of upskill someone who's just maybe had basic surgical training to get it advanced, often in trauma or wound or war situations. Where might that be?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think what's really great about these solutions is they're not created for only one part of the world, but they're really democratizing it across everywhere, whether you're in the US, Europe, or in the middle of a camp hospital, middle of nowhere. And we've really demonstrated that kind of versatility and feasibility across that, building a platform that can work on low bandwidth, that can adapt to bandwidth availability. So we have examples. I'll just really quickly kind of reel off 2 or 3 where, for example, there was a doctor in Chicago who was really interested in upskilling healthcare workers, nurses, healthcare workers, kind of local teams in Ethiopia for evaluating ear assessments, as simple things from wax to sort of mastoiditis and other things, how to use the microscope, how to evaluate the eardrum, how to evaluate kind of the inner ear. And she was able to upskill and train and move from having, I think there were only 2 skilled healthcare workers in that whole part of the country to about 8 in the span of like 6 to 8 months. And she published on it, and she sort of demonstrated how she could scale the delivery of care in local communities, and not just coming in as a kind of overseas doctor to sort of save the day, but actually upskilling local teams to deliver local care. And we've done the same in cleft lip and palate in Peru, in a town called Trujillo, where we were able to upskill local teams to not only optimize their results and their pace at surgery and their efficiency, but also be able to then feel comfortable mentoring and coaching other young doctors within their surgical field as well. And there are, many more, like Benin that we've done recently, and Kenya with maternal health. So there's real need and real opportunity. If you have the right solution designed for that kind of global reach, it's really magic what you see at the other end of it.
Yeah, I would echo that as well. We've done some things with, on the hernia side with, Haiti and some other places, and it was the same thing. Some of our KOLs started out flying there and sort of doing those procedures hand on, and then it was, how do you start to use technology to, the analogy, give a man a fish versus teach a man to fish. And so, especially with, a lot of the just general infrastructure advancements over recent years, it's becoming more and more scalable to do that, and to, exactly like Nadine said, to really democratize that kind of learning and capability in other parts of the world that don't have as much infrastructure as we have here, as they have in Western Europe or other places.
So we just got a couple minutes left. Maybe I'd pitch it back to Catherine and Raphael and Nadine for any closing thoughts, and anybody else want to jump in with a quick question or comment as we close up?
Perhaps the theme that's been coming up over and over and over again is this use of the technology and the connectivity to increase this global skill level, and to get out of the very siloed, gate-kept world of medical education being only available inside medical schools and not being available to teach you to do this next thing once you're outside of the formal training. And so I'm excited. This is one of those things where in the past, that whole see one, do one, teach one, you've been able to keep it inside. And now that you can stretch sort of beyond these boundaries, I think we're going to see a big sea change happen in what is considered acceptable medical education, and what we are going to need to do in terms of credentialing and assessment associated with someone being able to have taken one of these trainings outside and then be credentialed to do something. And so I'm excited. These things tend to happen in waves, the structure of scientific revolutions, and the technological sort of democratizing of this education is going to force the way we think about credentialing and assessment of skill to adapt as well.
Before we go, I wanted to throw out one thing that has not come up, which I think is really interesting. And Catherine, when you were talking, I think about throwing into, I can't remember if it was you or Nadine, but throwing into the circumstance like an unplanned event and being able to help people learn, like to anticipate. There's a nurse practitioner who works with diabetes patients, and she created what's called the fake beaties simulation. And she pairs patients with practitioners, and she takes the practitioners and she throws out at them on a daily basis, when they're in this challenge, a glucose level that they have to manage in the middle of their day. And what they found has been really interesting in the practice is that it's given them a much deeper understanding of what the patient experiences. And this empathy has actually, been powerful in thinking about not only how they teach, but how they practice. And so there is that interesting piece of when you put somebody else in a situation that maybe they haven't experienced before, maybe we're going to develop a level of empathy within our training, our trainees, our team members, to see what it's like to experience something like that. So, we haven't mentioned the role of empathy and where that can play a role in helping us to be better practitioners or better teachers. And I think, when you described that, it reminded me a lot of what they're doing with this Big Beaties challenge.
Yeah, and I want to say, Dan, thank you for allowing me to be here. And, we're living in fascinating times, and technology is developing faster than we can even cope with it. But I think that over the last 5-10 years, we've seen a real grasp on how do we use technology to upskill, to augment, to enhance the humans. And we're talking about surgeons and doctors, but let's remember the healthcare team, remember the nurses, the basic care practitioners, which is really the ones who make the difference at the primary level. That primary care is one of those things that the only way to fix healthcare, the disaster that healthcare is facing all over the world, is to upskill and enhance those primary care providers. And if we use these technologies in a smart way, I think that we will get there. I think that we have seen a lot of examples today in this brief talk of things that are real, that are not potential anymore. Things are happening, and it's really fascinating to see that we are finally getting places. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks everybody, and we're going to see, the evolution of Google Glass to now whatever Facebook metaverse is going to do, and whatever you think about Facebook, that kind of metaverse for healthcare education, the Meta OR, ER, clinic, care anywhere, and layered with AI and smart elements can really sort of democratize healthcare in some amazing ways. So thanks, especially to our lead discussants, Rafael, Nadine, Catherine, Deepak, and for all of you for joining today on our second Intel Jam, exploring the cutting edge and future. Stay safe, and we'll see you on our next Jam. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Good one.